All right, welcome to Knowledge Publishing. We're glad to have you join us today. And today we are here seated on the table to have a conversation, to have a discussion in commemoration of the International Day of Education 2025. And of course, as a publishing house, we are also at the forefront of the education sector. And that's why it's important that we came here to have this discussion. And my name is Kayode Sanni. And as you can see, I have two amazing, beautiful looking people seated right beside me. Mr. Servio Gbadamosi, the one and only himself. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
On my left is the beautiful, peculiar Ibitomi. Good to have you joining.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's get straight to the matter. The theme for this year is AI and education, preserving human agency in a world of automation. And according to UNESCO, it says it's encouraging reflections on the power of education to equip individuals and communities to navigate, understand, and influence technological advancement. But before we zone in on all of that concept or the theme, let's start from the broader perspective, education. Because it also seemed to me as though that when people talk about education, they're talking about the four walls of a school. But I think it's different, school, education. But let's get an understanding. Let me start with my old guy here. Education. How would you describe education?
I would say that education is the process of acquiring knowledge, skills, values, and understanding to develop oneself. And then, of course, when the self is developed, that development extends to the society, to the community in which one also lives and then functions and go. So the society itself becomes a beneficiary of the education, of the values, of the knowledge, of the skills that the individual develops.
What about you, Peculiar? How would you describe education?
Okay, like you rightly mentioned, sometimes when we talk about education, we have preconceived notions that it should be limited to the four walls of a classroom. But this is 2025, and then the COVID year was one of those landmarks in education that made us to realize that education cannot be limited to the four walls of a classroom. So for me, education, when it comes to education, you can either describe it as a formal education or informal education. Okay. You could get education through various sources of media. You could get education in the classroom. You could get education from anywhere. But the basic thing or the fundamental thing to education is you're acquiring the knowledge, like you said. So once you acquire, the medium of acquiring that knowledge might not be the focus, but the focus should be on what you're acquiring. So far, you're getting educated. So far, you're getting to know more. You're getting better. I think that's what I would describe education as.
Amazing. So if there's anything that I got from what the both of you have said is that acquisition, acquisition is something that will equip you as an individual. But then let's look at it from the global perspective. Education, the education sector. How would you describe education globally? What is the state of education right now? I mean, when I say that, I mean like, what is the standard of education right now globally? What would be how would you describe the acceptable global standard for what education should look like?
Well, I think across the global north, you can say that education is at a far and much higher developed pace. You have, and by this I mean largely institutions of learning, formalized types of education, and even the non-formal education. They have, over the years, through the decades and centuries leading up till now, been able to put adequate structures and systems in place in line with the needs of that country. Because education is country specific. Each country has to sit and then set its own goals, what it wants to achieve, design its own educational system in line with the goals and objectives of that nation. But of course, across the global south, which is where we live, you find that even though we have, like we had that national conference on education back in time, which was like a springboard for the development of the educational policy in Nigeria, that's On the strength of that, you had that movement, that recommendation that led to the review of the education system for us to then have the 6334 recommendation. But even that in itself, I suspect is due for a change now, because it's long overdue for a change. Because what are the current needs of the nation? What are the future needs of the nation? Initially, the goal was to get the goal was one of the primary goals for formal education initially was for literacy, was literacy and numeracy skills to get people to be able to read, write,
And
understand,
basic
be able to do
numerical
basic arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication. But we need to then, if we look at how it has been happening on the global scene, you begin to see that countries have evolved from that basic need of education to a specialized need. Would have moved towards the specialized needs of education with particular reference to the requirements of their country. What do we want our country to be known or reputed for? Do we want to lead, for example, a country that wants to major on agriculture, for example, would want to tailor its educational system to prioritize agriculture. Some countries have, in one way or the other, worked towards prioritizing manufacturing. Some countries have worked through one way or the other to design their economy or their educational system towards being a tourism destination and all of that. So what is the vision? What is the vision that we're trying to achieve with our educational system in this country? I don't know if you get what I'm trying to mean, what I'm trying to say, because that vision that we have in mind would help us ask more relevant questions and be able to further review and redesign what we currently have. What are we trying to achieve? What's the goal of education for us as a country, not just as individuals now? Individuals have personal pursuits. Somebody wants to be a medical doctor, somebody wants to be a fashion designer, somebody wants to be an engineer, and all of that. But in the line of all of those personal pursuits, the nation is what serves as a binder for all our individual pursuits. And all those individual pursuits, our nation becomes an aggregation of those dreams, or whether they are fulfilled or not. And if we design the learning system to help us attain that, it moves us closer towards new realms of development that can galvanize the development and unity of our nation better than it currently is.
Amazing. I'm still going to get to the idea of the country specifics, current and future needs, and crafting a vision. I'm going to get to that in a bit. But Pekula, how would you describe education? How would you describe the state of education in Nigeria currently?
That's a tough one, but I'll make an attempt to address it regardless. The state of education in Nigeria. Before the pandemic, it was a different story. It was what was obtainable before the pandemic is almost different from what you would observe now. Before the pandemic, education was just something that until you get to the classroom before you can have access. But after the pandemic, we discovered that the scope of education has been expanded to how we receive, how we learn, how we acquire knowledge, and all of that. And I think as a result of the pandemic, the standard has been increased, sort of, because one of the objectives or the goals of education is to ensure that everybody or majority have access, they are included. So now that although the gap might have been widened as a result of technology, but at the same time, after the pandemic, we've observed more increase. Like we've observed people having more access, getting more interested in education. Although the war and a few other factors are still influencing the number of out of school children, you have, especially in the northern part of the country and some selected parts of the country as well. But regardless of that, the state of education in Nigeria, it can be better, because it can be better, let me just put it that way, compared to what we've had previously. But I trust with the fact that the pandemic has created so many dynamics. We would continue to adapt and then increase the standards of what we currently have.
And I think that it's good that you made mention of technology because that's what we're still going to zone in at the end of the day. But before
Yeah.
we get to that, you made mention of crafting a vision and understanding what we need as a country when it comes to education. And just like you said when we understand what we need as a country, then we can design a learning process that helps us to achieve that. So, what's the answer now? What do you think we need as a nation now, and how should we design learning systems that can help us address that?
Well, the current goal of education in Nigeria is to foster national development. And if we go by that goal, I don't think that we have done much to be able to achieve it. Because how much of national development, by whatever indices you choose to use to measure it,
Measure.
have we achieved? But again, the world has changed. COVID-19, post-COVID, the world has changed, and we have seen what even Nigeria was able to do with the inclusion and use of educational technology, internet-based, media-based educational technology during the pandemic. Yes, schools were closed. Most of us could not even go outside of our homes. But learning continued. People were acquiring knowledge. A lot of platforms and applications for learning, for the exchange of knowledge came up, and schools migrated to those platforms. Besides the schools, now when we're talking about schools and the migration to such platforms, we are likely talking about schools in urban areas.
Yeah.
In urban areas where you have people who the fast disappearing middle class, children of the fast disappearing middle class, where they can at least have internet access to be able to, join such platforms, participate in learning activities and all. But beyond that, there is inadequate funding for the educational sector, inadequate infrastructure, limited access to education. And by this, we're talking about formal education now. We have not even started discussing the lack of focus on informal education and how that can also contribute to the goal of national development. So, for example, I don't know when the last time was you went by a public primary school, a public secondary school, you look at the dilapidated structures. Some of them don't even have adequate chairs. Yeah. The buildings are inadequate. Some of them learn in terrible conditions. Some learn under trees, sit on bare floor. And we're not even talking about the low motivation, how poorly paid teachers are, how their numbers are insufficient, how underqualified a lot of them are. Some of them are, how poorly motivated they are. And the factors are too many. And I think that any nation that wants to take its future and development seriously has to consciously and deliberately invest in education, because that is how you shape the mind, the heart, body, soul of your citizens. And it is what you shape and build into them that you reap the benefits as they grow older. So we are doing ourselves and our future as a nation a disservice by not investing as much as we should in the educational sector. It's underfunded. We have not even started talking about learning materials. The absence of learning materials. We're not talking about how archaic some of the curricula that is being used to teach are. There are new, for example, at the tertiary level, there are courses that ought to have been unbundled, reviewed, the curriculum overhauled and everything. But you still find that these courses are still being taught like they were taught 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Just little or no modifications have been made to them. And now, for how long do we continue to churn out poorly qualified, poorly trained graduates? Because you expect learning is comprehensive. in that it is you are not just taking in what you are being taught.
You
You
should
are
be able
being taught
to
to develop your mind, to think critically,
and apply.
analytically, and apply that knowledge to whatever challenges or situations you will face either in your personal life, in your work life, in the family, or in the society at large. Education helps you to apply yourself. And if we don't develop that sense of critical thinking, that sense of that analytical mind,
Problem solving.
problem solving skills, and all of this, how would you be able to meet the bigger and real challenges that you would face when you go into the larger society? You are still going to face these challenges in the workplace. You are going to face them. You are going to face them in your family. You are going to you are going to face them. In any area or sphere of life in which you happen to find yourself or situate yourself, there are challenges, and we have not even started talking about our needs as a nation and the peculiar challenges that we face. Because it is when you can think, when you can look at what a problem is, decipher what the problem is, and be able to design possible solutions to it. Those solutions help you or help other people in the society. And by that contribution of yours, you have moved the society towards or closer to the development that it really craves and envisions for itself. So we need to take education and the use of modern technology more seriously.
Now, on the idea of modern technology, thankfully you brought us from COVID-19, that COVID-19 opened us all. But I don't know if you'll agree with me that while that is true that it opened us to other style of acquiring knowledge, especially with the use of technology. When someone is on the other end of the digital sphere, let's do an online training course, let's do this one. You also agree with me that it has also left out some people, and just like you said now, that we say we are still battling with a whole lot. Most of our public primary schools, secondary schools are still battling and dealing with a whole lot. I think it was in 2023 when there was a video from one state in Nigeria that showed students in the rain, under the tree, and all of those situations. Yes, while we have those technological, improvements here and there, I don't know if you'll agree with me that it has also left out a huge part, even as we see how the middle class is sort of diminishing a little bit. But then how can we correct that? Saying that while indeed that we've seen little sort of improvement in the use of technology,
In education.
but then how do we now bridge the gap between those that are somewhat left behind now?
Okay. Thank you for your question. The fact that there's no doubt the gap has been widened as a result of technology in education. And for me, I think one of the factors is the budget for education also in the country. The budget for education in the country, the budget for education in some selected states, not even selected states. If we go through the budget for education in all the states in Nigeria, the percentage for education is shocking and alarming, because for any country to develop, and that is the major difference between developed countries and those we call developing countries, because they focus on investing on the indices that contribute to development. When it comes to development, the indices you check unemployment, you will check inequality, you will check poverty. Now, taking a look at poverty, inequality, and unemployment, at the core of everything, you will find education. Somebody that is educated has higher chances to be employed than somebody that is not educated. And then the gap of inequality that way is closed a little. Then poverty, somebody that is employed is adding value, is getting value, and then all of that. So it's a chain. So the gap has been widened because of technology, no doubt. But at the same time, the government has a lot of work to do. Now, people that are left behind in terms of technology in education, you will find them more in places where you have increased number of out of school children. So these are places that the poverty rate, the poverty percentage is so high that the first thing they would consider are the basic needs the people need to survive, which is food, clothes, shelter, before they would even consider education. So for somebody that is trying to survive, to get something to eat, education will not be a priority at that moment. So the government also needs to increase the budget for people that cannot afford those devices, those applications, because they are not in the high class society, the elite or whatever. At least they can have the government to support or to fund some of these devices, some of these gadgets that will enable them earn. So even though their parents are not as buoyant as others, they can leverage on the government, and then through the provisions of the government, the facilities, infrastructure, they would also be able to catch up, and then the gap of technology would be closed a little,
And
if not completely.
I'm thinking about this technology also, especially talking about advancement in technology, seeing how technology has so advanced globally now. Now we're talking about AI, and of course, the thing is saying that AI and education. Technology and education is one thing. To now talk about AI and education is another thing entirely, right? Preserving human agency in the world of automation. And I think this is where I want to also zone in totally. As we're talking, it also occurred to me that for the stakeholders, teachers especially, looking at it from the formal sector, right? How equipped are they? How well equipped are they? Talking about because they are the ones to
To disseminate,
disseminate this information
knowledge
to impart this knowledge
and transfer.
how well how do I say this now?
How prepared are we?
Yes,
How prepared are they?
for the major stakeholders, and what can be done? So that's my question. Especially talking about AI, because what UN is saying here is that we need to, use education to equip individuals and communities to navigate, understand, and influence technological advancement. But when I don't even have any tools, or when I'm not even exposed,
You don't even understand
how can I even influence anything? So I think to wrap it up is to say for our major stakeholders, the teachers, the tutors, anyone disseminating knowledge right now, imparting knowledge right now, what are we to do with them? How can we help them to increase their technological capacity so that they can jump on this trend, even if we are still waiting for the government to do their part? But what can we do in the interim?
Well, I think that we're going too far. If we say that, if with your last question, because there's a huge section, a significant portion of the Nigerian population that education does not appeal to, not because they are uninterested, but because of the high level of poverty, of lack in which they live. The first thing they do on a daily basis is struggle to be alive. They struggle to survive. Little or no shelter, little or nothing to eat, poor or inadequate clothing, and all. Now, if you go and approach such people and you begin to talk to them about how good education is, how it can change things for them, how it can turn their fortunes around and prepare them for the future, do you think that your appeal will not fall on deaf ears? It will. First, we need to understand and make the situations and social conditions that would make them human available to them. So, when we begin to work deliberately, and there are lots of NGOs and private individuals who are doing this, but they are not a substitute for the development of social infrastructures, of social services that people like that, social and economic services that people like that need to cross the poverty line. It is the government and policymakers who sit down, develop policies that can help a large chunk of the population of any country attain whatever it is that the government of the day considers important. These are policy-based, policy-driven decisions. So whatever we do in our private capacities, either as individuals or as non-governmental organizations, can only help to ameliorate, cannot eliminate. How many people can we take out as individuals, as NGOs. But if the government is serious and makes it a duty to say we have 20 something million, for example, number of out of school children, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, we want to work towards it such that 70, 50, 80% of them will be enrolled in schools. There are people who drop out of school because they can't afford it. We are talking about public schools that cost next to nothing. But there is that cost of uniform. Time itself is a cost. Some people who should be in school are out there involved in some economic activity that would help
For
them
their
or their
parents or
family
guardians.
stay alive. If we don't make the society, if we don't work on economic prosperity such that they are, first of all, able to meet their basic everyday need, we are going to lose the contribution that that part of our population can bring to the nation's development through education. Now, when that is done, we can then begin to talk about, okay, even those ones that are in school, what are they being taught? What are the structures that are available? How do we leverage technology, for example? How do we bring in AI? How do we bring in multimedia services and multimedia learning to aid? Because, for example, we talk about insufficient number of teachers, for example, but most schools, we have radio. There's almost no community you will go through in this country that does not have at
A
least
community radio.
that does not have one form of radio or the other. The radio station does not have to be resident in that community, but they tune in, and we can communicate and relay educational content tailored to different age grades in that community. We can relay it to them. But some people have to sit down based on what the requirements of the country is, based on the available policies, because you can't contravene policies too.
Definitely.
Based on those policies, design those educational content and target them at those age groups. That's one thing that technology can help us do. And we're even talking about old school technology that is readily available in most of our rural communities. Radio. You can sit by the radio, listen to programs, listen to stories. Some of these things can even be storified or provided in indigenous languages. Because who says that you have to learn or study in English to be considered educated? What education is, that acquisition of knowledge that helps you apply yourself to the situations and needs of life. So if you can apply yourself in your indigenous language, you are educated. So we need to think outside the box. When we say technology, it does not just mean internet-based technologies. Yes, internet-based technologies would work perfectly in urban areas where you have people who already have a semblance of what the metropolis or cosmopolis means, who have a slightly higher earning power. For example, they can afford smartphones, smart devices, internet subscriptions on a regular basis for themselves and their wards to be able to access these contents. But for the person who is outside of those urban areas, and that's a large portion of our country, right? Radio is a veritable tool. Not even TV, because the TV is still urban in a sense. But radio reaches even where little or no development has ever been to.
No, we find these brothers from the north who tune into BBC.
Yes, BBC Hausa service.
Yes, and all of those places.
VOA and Voice of Nigeria too. That's how they get the news. That's how they know what's happening in the world around them and co. And you also have them in indigenous languages that they understand. And this is how it's a combination. It's a combination of different approaches that can help us, because we have lost out on so many years in which we ought to have covered these grounds. And I feel that if we say, okay, we are only going to do this, we are only going to do that, we cannot cater to the educational needs of the urban population at the expense
The rural
of the
areas.
rural areas. But again, we cannot also cater to the needs of the rural areas and say,
And
okay, let's
ignore
freeze the development in the urban
urban
area
areas.
and let these people level up first. We have to be able to evolve and bring up a combination of approaches, that would help
Simultaneously.
us, grow, help the people who are lagging behind to level up, and help the people who have a semblance of development to also continue evolving with the times.
Awesome, awesome. I still have lots of questions, but we can't go. I must not go beyond all of this. But on this day of International Day of Education 2025, what will be your message to the government and to the entire population?
Okay, to start with, to the government, I strongly suggest that the budget for education should be increased, because the budget for education would go a long way in doing so many things in terms of training for teachers or tutors, in terms of facilities, infrastructure, in terms of research. For instance, you mentioned something about traditional media, the use of radio in rural areas. I conducted a study shortly after COVID-19 about the use of radio for education during the pandemic. And then some states in Nigeria actually kept that in place, teaching students in secondary school through radio. But unfortunately, for the area in which I conducted my study, it was shocking to discover that out of 400 respondents, only a few got to know that there was a provision of learning for them on the radio while they were at home. So there's a lot of work to be done, and that's one of the things the budget will cater for. So there's a need to even conduct research. Let's know what the problem is. Let's identify the current gaps in the educational sector in the country. Then we can make recommendations for research, for policymakers and all of that. So we don't just assume things. We can know the current state of things and then provide solutions or prefer solutions that would actually work for those things or those areas. Then for the population, like we've said, education is not limited to the four walls of a classroom. And then education is not just about going to school. Education changes a whole lot when it comes to development, personal development, community development, or even national development. Imagine somebody that is not educated, and then the person goes to a pharmacy or somewhere to get drugs, and then the person cannot even read the instructions on the tablet or on the syrup or whatever. That's one of the hazards of not being educated. So education is not just about going to the classroom or being in a formal setting. In any way possible, at whatever level that you are, you need to continually acquire knowledge. Continually acquire knowledge. If you have the means, if you don't have the means, whatever means or whatever medium is available, whatever alternative you can explore at the very moment, considering your economic status, just make sure you continually acquire knowledge as the days go by. So that would be it.
What about you?
My last word would be to continue to say, for us all to continue to encourage educators, policymakers, and we are in the creative sector, and creatives across our nation to always look for ways in which we can work together. Share our personal commitment towards using storytelling, for examples, using storytelling, using the media, using creative projects, using publishing to further the goals of education, the goals of personal development, for not just for ourselves as people who work and operate in this sector, but to also meet the educational needs that we have as a country. Because if we have this in mind, we would be able to, evolve more passion projects, for example, more passion projects that would be centered around impact, centered around human-centered learning, that will focus on human-centered learning, that can help bring about change and development in our society. Community libraries, for example, are practically non-existent in most of our urban areas, not to talk of our rural areas. Most schools don't even have libraries. So most students who are in school, we are not talking about the ones outside of school, don't even know what it means to go to a library. So, for example, if I can put together a small library in my street, a small library. Maybe I talk with myself, or I talk with fellow neighbors or other landlords in that environment, and somebody donates a small kiosk, a small shop, and we say, oh, you can come here every Saturday, for example, and lend a book or two, and there's somebody who can walk you through the reading process, how to read and write and code. That helps impact the lives of people in that community. And it does not necessarily have to be the community in which I live or work. It could be a community that I've identified that this community has a need for something like this. And there could be passion projects, but they don't have to be capital consuming, capital intensive. It's something that we can do. So these are some of the ways in which we can contribute in our personal, in our private capacities as citizens. But of course, the bulk of the work still lies in the hands of our educators, of the government, of the policymakers.
Awesome, amazing discussion right here. So this is as far as we can go. We thank you for joining in, and we hope you got value from all of the conversation. And please, we'll also like to hear from you. So if you have questions, please let us know in the comment section. If you have comments, drop it also in the comment section. I'm sure that we'll be there to answer you and also engage on this discussion, because I feel that the conversation of education is continuous. It's continuous. We can't just say it's one day and it's that and that's all. We have to continue engaging the policymakers, engage the stakeholders, including publishing houses like this, also to have this kind of conversation. So, but thank you. I will see you next time. Bye.